Hey there everybody, it's Russ, and in this video I just wanted to give you guys a super quick update on my experience with Microshift Sword. This is the new component group from the brand Microshift, and it's supposed to be a more budget-friendly, all-mechanical OEM alternative to something like Shimano GRX. If you recall, in my first video I tested everything but the shifter. Well, I got the part I needed late last week, installed it. It's shifting well, and I thought I would give an update so far. What do I think of the paddle placement? Does it shift good? Is it compatible with Advent X? If you have an older Advent X derailleur but want to run the new shifter, will it work? All those questions and more in this video. Before we get into it, I do want to point out why I did that initial video like I did. We live in Missoula, Montana. We're deep in fire season. At any moment, things could catch up on flames and I'll be off the bike for weeks because of smoke, because 2023. So for me, it made more sense to test it out imperfectly, because who knows when all the smoke's going to filter back in the valley, rather than not be able to test it at all. So that's all I'm going to say about that. So first off, how does it shift? I took a couple of short rides with it and it shifts fine, perfectly fine. You push a button and it gets into gear. In my opinion, it takes a little bit more force than a Shimano lever. Again, like I predicted, it shifts fine without the refinement of Shimano. So from a pure does it shift when I want it to shift perspective, it works great. If I do have some complaints, and I want to stress this is me getting excessively picky here, is that if you're coming from SRAM or Shimano, the levers are going to take some getting used to. One thing I do love about the lever is that you can actuate the brake independent of the shifters, so there's no accidental shifting when you're trying to brake, or no accidental braking when you're trying to shift. Does that make sense? Everything is a very distinct kind of lever or button. In terms of the lever placement, I do wish there was less of a gap between the upshift and the downshift paddle. Like either bring this one a little bit lower or bring this lower one a little bit higher, you know? It just feels like there's a bit of a no man's land right here in the middle where your finger can fall into. So to get into a easier gear, you use the big paddle. The throw is a lot longer. Whoops. The throw is a lot longer than going into the harder gear. This is literally, going into a harder gear is literally more of a button press than it is a lever throw. In some ways it's similar to the Campy thumb shifter going into the harder gear. Of course it's on this side of the lever, and instead of a button for the thumb, it is a very short paddle. Shifting on the bike, I found that it made more sense to use two distinct digits, the pointer finger to shift into the harder gear and the middle finger to actuate the paddle going into a lower gear. If you try to use the same finger for both, there's a lot of like finger gymnastics moving from this higher position to the lower position. So functionally speaking, it's more of like a two-button mouse, let's say. Another thing that I noticed that took a little bit of time to get used to, again, is the discrepancy in lever throw. Going into a harder gear is a very short button press, and going into a longer gear is a much longer press. So you kind of have to train your fingers to anticipate two different levels of lever throw. In terms of shifting smoothness, it works really well, you know? I mean, you can shift up to 2 gears or drop into 2 lower gears at a time. Going into a harder gear, you know, it feels like a little machine gun action there. Very tactile and clicky. If you're into mechanical keyboards, this might be your jam. So again, shifting performance works great. Ergonomics may take some adjustment, especially if you're deep into SRAM or Shimano. But again, these are things you can adapt to. You're all brilliant humans. Another big question that got asked a lot in the original video is if you have Advent X already and you just want to upgrade the shifter to this new integrated cable shifter, will it work? And the answer is yes. Actually, right now on the Hachita, I swapped in the old Advent X rear derailleur just to make 100% sure it works with the Sword drifter, and it works flawlessly. So yes, if you want to upgrade just the shifter, you can do that, which is nice that they kept that backwards compatibility. The last thing I wanted to touch on was an incompatibility issue I discovered in the first video. So just to recap, the stock Sword cranksets come with a 40 and 42 tooth chainring. I was trying to swap in a 36 tooth wolf tooth chainring from a GRX crank just to make sure it would fit. Nominally on paper, they have the exact BCD dimensions. What I found, however, was the machining of the crank on the back was incompatible with the GRX ring. The holes were in the same space, but the tab shapes were a little bit different. I reached out to Microshift and asked, what was going on here? Were they trying to come out with their own standard? And the response I got was that in this particular pre-production crank, there must have been some manufacturing error, but they assured me in the future production cranks, there should be perfect compatibility between GRX rings and Sword. So does that make sense? If you get a bike with a Sword crank and you want to run a chainring that's sub 40 tooth, in the future you should be able to use aftermarket rings for said purpose. If you want to run the 38 or 36, you'll be able to do that. But I was able to catch an oopsie that will hopefully let them kind of correct the problem down the road. So as I suspected, it shifts nicely, if not a little bit different. Yes, it's compatible with Advent X, and yes, the chain rings will be compatible in the future. If you like this video or found it helpful, you guys know what to do. Hit that subscribe button. I don't think GCN is going to go into as much detail as I am with a group set like Sword. It's not electronic, it's not fancy. Since this is a group set I'm authentically excited about because you can still use mechanical brakes, I'm going to go a little bit deeper than they will. If you appreciate that, you know what to do, and as always, keep the supple side down.